Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's formidable flagship, the mighty Musashi, led the center force into the treacherous waters of the Sibuyan Sea with a sense of unwavering purpose. This colossal warship was a sight to behold, so immense that her superstructure and bridge towered higher than the mast of a standard destroyer, making her a commanding presence on the battlefield. She was, without doubt, a symbol of Japan's naval might, the most heavily armed battleship ever constructed and deployed during wartime. The Musashi stood proudly as Japan's maritime shield, a vital component of an operation designed to decisively influence the fate of the Philippines. Kurita's orders were explicit: to forge a path through the narrow sea lanes, break through the American defensive lines near Leyte, and eliminate the invading fleet before it could establish a foothold and land troops in force. The mission was critical, and the stakes could not have been higher, as victory here could dramatically alter the course of the campaign in the Pacific theater. As Kurita's fleet advanced through the confined and perilous channels of the Sibuyan Sea, a tense atmosphere mounted. Lookouts stationed high above the decks began to report a strange phenomenon. Thin, white streaks traced stark patterns across the clear blue sky. First one, then several more. These contrails, outlines of aircraft flung into the sky, signaled that something unprecedented was unfolding. The sky was entirely free of clouds, and the Japanese fleet had no air cover to speak of, a vulnerability that loomed large over their operation. Kurita, from his command position aboard the mighty Musashi, watched silently as the white lines elongated and thickened, stretching relentlessly toward the fleet. It was a sight that no battleship in history had ever faced alone, an enemy air force encroaching from above, ready to strike with devastating precision. In the wake of the Battle of the Philippine Sea, a crushing defeat that shattered Japan's naval air supremacy, Japanese leaders still clung to the hope that a decisive sea engagement could delay the impending American invasion. They believed that, perhaps, one more blow to the American fleet could turn the tide, buying precious time and offering a final chance for their shattered navy to rally and fight again. With the Allies' next target clearly the Philippines, Japan's military strategists launched Operation Shomanus I, a complex and daring plan designed to lure the formidable American carrier forces away from their intended landing sites. The operation involved employing Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's northern force as bait, deliberately drawing the attention of Admiral William F. Halsey's carriers, while other Japanese units would launch a series of attacks against the exposed invasion fleet. The centerpiece of this ambitious plan was Vice Admiral Kurita's center force. Charged with delivering the decisive blow, Kurita's fleet was instructed to navigate through the San Bernardino Strait from the north, passing with purpose and determination towards Leyte Gulf. This force was among the most powerful assembled by Japan, a true testament to their naval engineering. It comprised the colossal super battleships Yamato and Musashi, along with 3 other battleships, all potent symbols of Japan's naval grandeur. Accompanying them were 5 heavily armed battleships, 10 formidable heavy cruisers, 2 smaller light cruisers, and a formidable squadron of 13 destroyers, all ready to engage in a fierce naval clash. On the 18th of October, orders were dispatched from Tokyo, a signal that set the grand maneuver in motion. Kurita set sail from Singapore, making a quick stop to refuel at Brunei, and then pushed northward through the Palawan Passage. Yet, as his ships moved forward, a shadowy threat loomed. American raids on Formosa and Luzon airfields had significantly reduced Japan's aviation capacity, leaving them with fewer than 100 operational aircraft. Worse still, a critical failure in Japanese communications meant Kurita was unaware that his fleet would be left exposed, without the anticipated air cover to defend against the attacking aircraft and submarines that awaited them. Suddenly, the navigational and strategic foundation of the operation crumbled. Kurita's fleet had no choice but to cross the Sibuyan Sea under the threat of enemy attack, relying solely on the anti-aircraft defenses mounted on the ships themselves. It was a perilous passage, made all the more dangerous by the lurking presence of American submarines. Even before the Japanese vessels had fully entered the sea, 2 of the U.S. Navy's submarines, Darter and Dace, executed a surprise attack. The consequences were devastating. the flagship Atago and the heavy cruiser Maya were swiftly sunk, disappearing beneath the waves in a matter of moments. This loss was a heavy blow to Kurita's force, while the damaged heavy cruiser Takeo was forced to retreat back toward Brunei, limping with injuries sustained in the skirmish. Despite the chaos and setbacks, Kurita himself was pulled from the water after the attack and transferred his flag from the sinking Atago to his flagship, the Yamato, as the remnants of the fleet pressed onward toward the Sibuyan Sea, determined to fulfill their mission. Meanwhile, in the waters off the eastern Philippines, Admiral William F. Halsey waited patiently but warily. His fleet was positioned strategically to intercept the Japanese force, aware that an engagement was imminent. By the 23rd of October, following reliable reports from submarines about the approach of the enemy, Halsey made the decision to move his 3 carrier groups closer to the coast, refueling and repositioning under cover of darkness to better prepare for the coming battle. As dawn broke on the 24th, American reconnaissance planes spotted Kurita's fleet, a formidable formation of 5 battleships, 9 cruisers, and 13 destroyers, making its way through the Sibuyan Sea, heading directly toward Leyte. Recognizing the threat, Halsey immediately ordered a full-scale launch of aircraft from his carriers. He directed wave after wave of bombers to target the advancing Japanese force, unleashing their destructive payloads in a relentless attempt to shatter the enemy's ranks and prevent the invasion from reaching its objective. This confrontation, looming in the waters of the Sibuyan Sea, was destined to become one of the most critical naval battles of the Pacific War, testing the resilience and strategic ingenuity of both Japan and the United States amid a tense, ever-escalating clash that would shape the course of history. As the morning unfolded, the initial formation of United States Navy strike groups was swiftly assembled, ready to engage in what would become a pivotal confrontation. From the vantage points aboard their ships, radar operators keenly observed a multitude of large Japanese air units approaching from the northwest. These formations were composed of land-based aircraft launched from the island of Luzon, as well as carrier-based planes from Vice Admiral Ozawa's Northern Force, a formidable fleet originally tasked with safeguarding Kurita's advancing forces. However, instead of serving their intended defensive purpose, these Japanese aircraft unexpectedly turned their firepower against the American task force, firing their ammunition in a fierce and unanticipated attack. For hours on end, American fighter planes courageously faced the oncoming assaults, engaging directly with the enemy in a series of intense aerial dogfights. These engagements were marked by extraordinary skill and ferocity, as the U.S. pilots refused to yield and succeeded in breaking the Japanese attack into fragments, scattering enemy aircraft across the vast expanse of the sky. Among these stalwart defenders was Commander David McCampbell, whose exceptional flying skills led him to shoot down 9 enemy planes in a single sortie, an achievement that earned him the prestigious Medal of Honor later on. The relentless efforts of the American fighters resulted in the destruction of most of the attacking aircraft, but in the chaos of battle, a single Japanese bomber managed to penetrate the defenses and strike the light carrier Princeton with a bomb weighing 550 pounds. The explosion ignited fires that soon spread out of control, culminating in a catastrophic chain reaction that led to the carrier's destruction before the afternoon. Tragically, more than 320 sailors lost their lives in the sinking, underlining the brutal cost of the fierce engagement. Meanwhile, as Sherman's carrier groups fought desperately for survival amid the chaos, other strategic modifications were taking place. Rear Admirals Gerald Bogan and Ralph Davison, commanding 2 of the remaining carrier groups, finally launched their own strikes towards the Sibuyan Sea, an area where Kurita's fleet was engaging in a critical movement across the waters close to the Philippines. At this point, from mid-morning through the early hours of the afternoon on October 24th, American carrier-based aircraft relentlessly attacked Admiral Kurita's fleet, executing wave after wave of strikes across the Sibuyan Sea. These attacks came with increasing intensity, each successive assault more devastating than the last, as Kurita's ships struggled to maintain formation against the onslaught. The positioning of these American forces was notably uneven. The group, led by Rear Admiral Gerald Bogan, which was ideally situated to deliver a decisive blow to Kurita, was, in fact, the weakest of the American formations. It consisted of one large fleet carrier and two light carriers, making it less capable of mounting a sustained offensive. Meanwhile, Vice Admiral John McCain's more robust carrier group was still en route to the atoll of Ulithi for resupply and replenishment, a delay that proved particularly consequential. Although Admiral Halsey issued orders to recall McCain's forces, the delay meant that nearly 40% of the Third Fleet's formidable air power would miss the battle altogether, an absence that could have carried significant strategic ramifications. At precisely 10:26 in the morning, the first wave of aircraft took to the skies, comprising 35 fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo planes launched from the carriers USS Intrepid and USS Cabot. The favorable weather conditions, clear skies and mild winds, provided ideal flying conditions for these early strikes as the planes headed westward toward the enemy fleet. The American pilots, invigorated yet somewhat taken aback, quickly confronted the fierce Japanese anti-aircraft defenses. Little did they realize at first that Kurita, anticipating potential attacks, had deliberately enhanced each of his ship's defenses to compensate for the shortage of friendly air cover. As a result, the Japanese battleships and cruisers unleashed a thundering barrage of artillery, with more than 100 guns firing relentlessly at the invading aircraft, supported by dozens of additional guns from nearby destroyers. The air defenses produced a deafening cacophony of noise that shook the sky, creating a deadly obstacle for the attacking planes. Despite the formidable Japanese anti-aircraft fire, the American fighters initially felt relief in the absence of enemy fighters. They quickly swooped in, strafing the Japanese ships in an effort to force their gun crews into cover and reduce their effectiveness. Following this initial assault, the torpedo planes and dive bombers moved in, aiming to take advantage of the disorganized state of the Japanese defenses in hopes of inflicting maximum damage. Most of the bombers and torpedo planes concentrated their efforts on the massive battleship Musashi, whose thick, reinforced steel armor was tested to its limits by the relentless pounding. Although the strikes also struck other significant ships like Nagato and Yamato, it was the cruiser Myoko that sustained the heaviest damage during the attacks, forcing her to turn back toward Brunei via Coron Bay for repairs and salvage. As the waves of American aircraft continued their assault, the Japanese forces endured increasingly severe damage. Musashi, Nagato, and Yamato all suffered substantial hits, impairing their combat capacity. Throughout this brutal aerial campaign, the Japanese commander, Admiral Kurita, found himself in a state of mounting desperation. In a hurried and urgent message transmitted to Vice Admiral Ozawa, he inquired whether the American forces had been successfully lured away from the strategic San Bernardino Strait, which was critical for maintaining Japanese supply lines and fleet movements. Additionally, he requested fighter escort support from Manila, hoping to bolster his defenses against the relentless aerial assaults. The engagement in the Sibuyan Sea turned into a decisive and intense confrontation, with American aircraft relentlessly pounding Kurita's fleet, leaving the Japanese unable to mount effective counterattacks and suffering heavy damage as they navigated through a landscape of swirling skies filled with fire, smoke, and the persistent roar of gunfire. In the chaos of the battle, the Japanese aircraft were primarily engaged in a fierce assault against the American carriers, especially those under Admiral Spruance's command, which were busy targeting Kurita's fleet to the east. Meanwhile, Kurita Hiroaki found himself in a precarious position, clinging to the hope that the fleet of ships sacrificed in this confrontation had achieved their intended purpose by drawing the American attack away from his main forces. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, by early afternoon, the notable battleship Musashi, which had previously been a symbol of Japanese naval strength, found herself struggling to maintain her course and make any significant progress in the waters off the Sibuyan Sea. The relentless attack had taken a toll, and her brave crew of sailors watched helplessly as descending waves of bombs and torpedoes relentlessly battered her formidable hull, leaving her listing precariously to one side and visibly wounded. The intensity of the assault was vividly recalled by Commander Dan Smith, who was an eyewitness to these harrowing moments. He described how during one of their dive-bombing runs, the aircraft flew into a thick cloud bank, causing the Japanese anti-aircraft fire to go quiet temporarily because the defenders could no longer see their aggressors. As the planes re-emerged from the clouds, the attack resumed with renewed ferocity, unleashing a barrage of deadly fire, like the hammers of hell pounding on the ship's steel sides. Commander Smith vividly remembered that the last time he saw Musashi, she was seemingly halted in the water with her bow and forecastle immersed, the massive warship shown to be severely crippled and unable to continue her fight. Meanwhile, a second wave of attacks launched by aircraft from the USS Intrepid, USS Essex, and USS Lexington pressed the assault even further. These carriers dive bombers from the VB-15 squadron, known as Helldivers, alongside the Hellcats of VF-15 fighters, each scored additional hits, around 10 in total, on the heavily listing battleship. The damage was visibly mounting, and Musashi was clearly in trouble, straining desperately to stay afloat amid the chaos. As she struggled against the inevitable, a third wave of attacks arrived from the aircraft carriers USS Enterprise and USS Franklin. These planes unleashed an onslaught of 11 bombs and 8 torpedoes, further overwhelming the battered vessel and forcing her past the brink of survival. As these relentless attacks persisted, aircraft from the USS Sherman's task group joined the fray, intensifying the assault against the remaining Japanese fleet elements. The once formidable Japanese air threat was rapidly neutralized. What little remained of it was now utterly eliminated. Multiple bombs struck Musashi directly, with one obliterating her command tower, the vital structure housing her main bridges, while torpedoes continued to slam into her hull, causing catastrophic damage. Simultaneously, other aircraft from the attacking forces launched continuous, rippling attacks against the cruisers and destroyers commanded by Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura and Vice Admiral Kyohei Shima, attempting to fend off the overwhelming onslaught. Facing this brutal onslaught without effective air cover of their own, the Japanese fleet's commander, Admiral Kurita, was left with no option but to hope that his anti-aircraft guns could somehow thwart the enemy's attack. With no support overhead, he could only pray that the firepower of his ship's defenses would be enough to prevent total destruction and loss of life. Throughout the assault, Musashi endured at least 17 direct bomb hits and 19 torpedo strikes, each contributing to her sinking state. Ultimately, after hours of relentless pounding, the enormous warship, one of the mightiest ever constructed by Japan, capsized and sank at approximately 7:35 in the evening. Her sinking claimed the lives of around 1,100 brave sailors who had served aboard her. By the conclusion of this harrowing day, the American carrier aircraft under Vice Admiral Halsey's command had flown a total of 259 sorties against Kurita's fleet, aiming to cripple or sink the Japanese ships that dared to challenge them in the waters near Leyte Gulf. In stark contrast, Japanese anti-aircraft defenses shot down only a modest total of 18 American planes throughout these intense air battles. Even the Japanese Admiral Agaki, who was witnessing these events unfold, noted with a sense of regret in his diary that the number of enemy aircraft shot down was disappointingly low, lamenting the missed opportunity to significantly weaken the attacking force. Despite the limited number of planes lost, the formidable power of the United States naval air offensive inflicted devastating damage upon the Japanese fleet. The battleships Yamato, Haruna, and Nagato all sustained serious damage, their once mighty hulls battered and impaired. The cruiser Myoko was forced to retreat to the safety of the port at Brunei for repairs, withdrawing from the battle. The sinking of Musashi, undeniably one of the largest and most powerful battleships ever built, marked a significant blow to Japan's naval capabilities. As the day drew to a close, October 24th signaled the commencement of the Battle of Leyte Gulf, a pivotal and decisive engagement in the Pacific theater. Believing the reports that Kurita's force had been effectively destroyed by the relentless American attack, Admiral Halsey decided to turn his fleet northward. His scouts had spotted a Japanese carrier group commanded by Admiral Ozawa, which presented what he believed to be a golden opportunity for the decisive engagement he had long desired. Confident in his force's superiority, Halsey deployed every available ship, leaving unguarded the approach through the San Bernardino Strait, a critical passageway connecting the open ocean to the landing beaches where the Allied invasion was underway. Regrettably, this critical message did not reach Admiral Thomas Kinkaid, whose forces remained stationed to cover the landings at Leyte, unaware of the strategic shift taking place to their north. Despite sustaining significant damage, Kurita's fleet, still under strict orders to press on, made the decision to turn their battered vessels back toward the narrow strait. The admiral's ships, battered but not defeated, carefully navigated their way through destruction and chaos, heading into the relative safety of familiar waters. With the departure of Halsey from the scene, the previously formidable barrier that had been preventing his progress was suddenly lifted. No more ships or forces stood in his way. As dawn broke on the 25th of October, Kurita's battle group was visibly advancing, making its way toward the gathering invasion fleet that was poised for an imminent assault. Meanwhile, to the south of this developing confrontation, Japan's southern naval offensive met a decisive and crushing defeat at the Battle of Surigao Strait. In the early morning light, the Japanese attacking force was decisively destroyed, ravaged, and shattered under the relentless fire of the Allied defenses. The action that unfolded that day was followed by a fierce engagement across the waters as Kurita's fleet encountered the small but resilient escort group known as Taffy 3. This group, comprised of lightly armed yet highly determined escort ships, stood their ground against the overwhelming Japanese force. Despite being outgunned and outnumbered, the American defenders fought with unyielding determination and ferocity. Their resistance was so fierce and determined that Kurita, observing the chaos and the intense fighting, was led to believe that he was facing an entire fleet rather than a comparatively small escort group. The American ships fought with such tenacity and resolve that the Japanese admiral's perception was completely distorted. He imagined himself up against a much larger and more formidable adversary. The intense combat resulted in heavy Japanese losses, forcing Kurita to make the difficult decision to retreat from the engagement. His retreat was hastened by the fact that Halsey had successfully neutralized Ozawa's decoy carriers, those ships that had been used to mislead and confuse the Japanese. With the deception dismantled and the real threat pressing forward, Kurita withdrew his battered fleet under heavy pressure. The battle, which ultimately concluded on the 26th of October, proved to be a decisive turning point that shattered Japan's naval capabilities in a manner from which they would not recover. In terms of losses, Japan suffered an immense toll. For aircraft carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, and 11 destroyers were entirely lost, along with more than 10,000 sailors who perished during the fighting. These losses marked a devastating blow from which Japan's naval power could hardly rebound. Conversely, American losses, though significant, were comparatively lighter, still costly, but not on the same catastrophic scale. Their resilience and effective defense helped pave the way for the next phase of the campaign. With Japan's naval strength so severely depleted and their fleet effectively shattered, the strategic pathway toward the homeland islands of Japan was laid wide open. The destruction of the Japanese fleet in this pivotal confrontation opened the door for further advances, bringing the Allied forces closer to their ultimate objective, the assault on the Japanese home islands.